Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Soul Talk and Psychic Advice. Today, we're going to talk about something that many people experience but often struggle to explain. And people ask me this a lot when I'm doing my work, and that is, what is a spiritual awakening? A spiritual awakening can be beautiful, but it also can be confusing, highly emotional, expansive, isolating, healing, and overwhelming. Sometimes some of these feelings, sometimes all of these feelings. And when it's all at once, it's like, whoa, what's happening here? Why is it happening? I remember I went through it twice. I went through it when I first got into this work, you know, before I started professionally, so about 26, 27 years ago. And I'm like, why is this happening? I wasn't looking for this. I have plans to be a scientist or something more traditional. And this happened while I was in chiropractic school, and no one really could explain anything, even other people who were going through it. So we were all just having a hard time. And then I went through it again when I lost my son because I questioned everything. I questioned how shut down people were, how much spiritual bypassing people were doing. I was very angry and frustrated, and I isolated at times and lost friends at times. And so I went through a lot. I went through it twice, and I feel like we go through it, more than once as we evolve. Some people think it's just one big awakening and you're set. No, because as life goes on, you're going to have growth spurts and you're going to go through things that make you question it all. And I was still trying to figure it all out before my son passed, and then when he passed, and just all the comments, that I experienced, and how people try to avoid pain at all costs, and they will bury it and they will put on that smile. We know more now not to do that, but at the time it was very, very hard. I'm like, what is going on? I don't want anything to do with this spiritual stuff. This is horrible. That's how I seen it. And I promised myself that I would work through mine so I could help people have an easier time with theirs when they came to me. So, like me, for some people, awakening begins after loss. My second awakening was after loss. For others, it begins after burnout, trauma, illness, heartbreak, emotional exhaustion, or feeling, or a deep feeling that something in life no longer fits. Like my first one was just forced upon me because I was being called to do this work. I didn't even have a say in it. Nothing was going on at the time. My son was alive. I was struggling in school, but that was it. So sometimes the awakening begins quietly, and sometimes it completely changes the direction of your life. Today, I want to talk about what spiritual awakening really is, what people often misunderstand about it, how the nervous system can be affected during the awakening, and how to stay grounded while moving through spiritual growth, because it's easy to become ungrounded. It is. Been there. And if you've been feeling emotionally different lately, more sensitive, more aware, more disconnected from old patterns, please know that you are not alone. So let's get into this. Let's talk about, what is a spiritual awakening? What is it? A spiritual awakening is often described as a shift in consciousness. You're starting to see reality differently. So, what does that actually mean? It means you begin seeing yourself, your life, your emotions, your relationships, and the world differently than you did before. Things that once felt normal may suddenly feel misaligned. You may start questioning, why am I living this way? Why do I keep abandoning myself? Why am I around certain people I shouldn't be around? Why do certain relationships drain me? Why do I feel emotionally exhausted all the time? Why do I feel disconnected from who I really am? You can kind of look at the world like, why am I here? What am I doing here? What's the point of all this? This is awful. You can feel really bad. Some people get depressed during these things. So if you find yourself getting depressed, seek help before you sink into that depression because it can happen. And during an awakening, many people begin waking up to patterns that they cannot fully see before. People pleasing, overgiving, emotional suppression, ignoring intuition, living from fear, and getting in your own way, seeking validation from others, and staying in survival mode. And sometimes awakening is not about becoming someone new. Sometimes awakening is about remembering who you were underneath conditioning, trauma, fear, and emotional protection. Awakening often removes emotional numbness, which means people begin feeling things more deeply. And while that can eventually lead to healing, at first it can feel overwhelming. Now, I want to make a note. A lot of times when people have a spiritual awakening, they just feel like they're going to jump into the spiritual world and they're going to be psychic and evolved and all knowing. I still hear this stuff. And you will become more aware of your gifts, but don't feel pressure to just jump right in. It's not a good idea. I recommend moving slowly with it, even though it feels overwhelming. Some people do extreme things. They immediately leave a relationship or they immediately cut everyone off and they just feel so much happening. And of course, a lot of people around you won't understand what you're going through, so it makes you kind of want to isolate. But this is what I would say: move slow with it. You don't have to just change your life overnight. Sit with it, journal, get some energy work, find out a plan. Because the way that thing it could come at you, and the way it came at me, it was too much. And sometimes it's just too much for the nervous system, and you can feel very dysregulated during this time. People are thinking enlightenment, all everything makes sense now. Maybe not at first, so give it time. So let's talk about how spiritual awakening is not always peaceful. No, it isn't. Um, One of the biggest misconceptions about spiritual awakening, about having one, is that it always feels peaceful, blissful, or magical. No, it can be very triggering. Sometimes the awakening feels very uncomfortable, very. And sometimes awakening involves endings, right? An ending of an old identity, who you used to be. It can cause an ending of relationships, especially if you're going through this and your partner's looking at you like, what's wrong with you? And you guys start disagreeing. Although sometimes there's problems before, and the awakening just speeds everything up. The ending of emotional patterns, the ending of coping mechanisms, the ending of pretending, and with old structures begin falling away, people can temporarily feel lost. Yes, you can feel like, why is this happening? This is awful. You may feel emotionally sensitive, right? And triggered easily, disconnected from certain people, exhausted, overstimulated, deeply introspective, uncertain about your direction in life, and drawn towards solitude, and emotionally raw. And when I think about it, I might be going through a third spiritual awakening because I've done a lot of solitude lately, some socializing, but a lot of solitude. Once I moved to Sacramento, I did have a shift, so I guess I did have a third spiritual awakening. I'm going to do a podcast talking about all three of my spiritual awakenings so you guys can know what it's like. Um, some people experience intense grief during awakenings. Not only the grief from losing someone, although sometimes after you lose someone you can trigger a spiritual awakening, but the grief for the parts of themselves they abandoned in order to survive. And we all have done it because we're humans and we're just trying to survive. And this is important. Spiritual awakenings is not proof that something is wrong with you. No, it's often a sign that your inner world is asking for honesty. Awakenings ask, what is no longer aligned? What have you outgrown? What needs healing? What needs truth? Yes, the nervous system and spiritual awakenings. Let's talk about it. This is something I believe is extremely important to understand. Not every intense emotional or energetic experience is purely spiritual. Sometimes the nervous system is overwhelmed, and many sensitive people confuse nervous system activation with spiritual information. Fear can sound intuitive when the body feels unsafe. Hypervigilance can feel psychic. Emotional overload can feel energetic. And this is why grounding matters so much. A regulated nervous system supports clearer perception. When the body feels unsafe, the mind often searches for danger. And during a spiritual awakening, old emotional material can begin surfacing. Past grief, childhood wounds, abandonment fears, suppressed emotions, unprocessed trauma. This is why awakening often includes emotional healing, not just spiritual insight. And I think this is where embodiment becomes so important. This is why it's important to have a regulated nervous system. We weren't doing all these things, you know, when I had my first spiritual awakening. We weren't. And so a lot of us were just really out of our bodies trying to cope. Because spirituality without grounding can sometimes lead people away from themselves instead of deeper into themselves. Healing is not about escaping the body, not at all. Healing is learning how to safely live inside your body because a lot of people are wanting to be out of their bodies, so too much pain and trauma. And during an awakening, many people need gentleness, not pressure, not perfection, not spiritual superiority. A lot of people think that's what it is, but no, it's not to become superior, but safety, rest, support, boundaries, emotional honesty, and nervous system regulation. Now that we know this, we can take care of ourselves better. Let's talk about common signs of a spiritual awakening. Everyone experiences their spiritual awakening differently, but there are some common experiences many people report. You may notice a stronger intuition. Yeah, it happened here. Increased sensitivity to environments or people. Feeling emotionally affected by energy around you. Wanting deeper meaning in life. Questioning old beliefs. Feeling disconnected from superficial conversations. Wanting more solitude. Yeah. Experiencing vivid dreams. Feeling drawn towards healing practices. Yes. Feeling emotionally exhausted around chaos or conflict. Feeling more connected to nature. Becoming aware of unhealthy patterns. Feeling called towards authenticity. And sometimes an awakening includes periods of loneliness. It does. Because as you change internally, your relationships may also change, and they do. You may no longer feel aligned with dynamics that require self abandonment. And while this can feel painful, it can also create space for healthier connection. Awakening is not about becoming better than others. No, it's about becoming more honest with yourself. And some people, I remember that when I first started getting into spirituality, being called, a lot of people did walk around like they were better, smarter, more enlightened. But they were just having a trauma response because they were trying to feel good about themselves after all the bad things that they probably went through growing up. I remember feeling like a hot mess. I didn't feel better than anybody, you know? And so it is about becoming more honest with yourself. So let's talk about spiritual awakenings and grief. For many people, grief becomes a doorway into awakening. Loss changes people. Grief strips away illusions. It does. It wakes you up in a way that, whoa. And I've had many losses, but losing my son, that really shook me up in the world. It changes priorities. It changes perspective. It changes identity. After deep loss, many people begin asking bigger questions. Why are we here? What truly matters? You're no longer just floating in the world like whatever, let me just get through this thing. What happens after death? How do I continue living after loss? That's why I love being a grief coach to help people. And sometimes grief opens emotionally and physical and spiritual depth that was previously hidden beneath survival. It just, everything comes up to the surface. But I also want to say this clearly. Being spiritually aware does not remove human pain. I'm going to say it again. Being spiritually aware does not remove human pain. People are hoping that it does. They're hoping that they'll be unbothered. I hate that word. They're hoping to not feel pain, that it automatically goes away. And I remember that's how it used to be in the spiritual community, and people were just so out of their bodies, and they were frustrated and angry and trying to put on a smile and say love and light. It was a really weird time. It weirded me out. And it almost made me walk away from spirituality because I'm like, something isn't right here. And I just couldn't get to the answer because everybody was seeking how to not feel pain, but they were going about it in a way that was not good. I've seen that a lot in the spiritual community many years ago. We're in a better place now, thank goodness. You can be deeply spiritual and still struggle emotionally. Don't feel bad if you do. You can be intuitive and still feel grief. Yes, I did, and people were actually shocked, and they're like, well, you're medium. I said, that don't mean shit. I lost my kid. You can be healing and still have hard days. Awakening is not the absence of pain. It's learning how to move through life with greater experiences, compassion, and truth. That's what it's about. How to stay grounded during an awakening. If you're moving through a spiritual awakening right now, grounding practices can be incredibly supportive. Simple things matter. Breathing deeply, resting, walking outside, touching the earth, moving your body gently, setting boundaries, reducing overstimulation, spending time away from constant noise and social media. Now the world is more noisy, right? Because we have so much social media, and some of it's very interesting. And if you work online, you have to be on social media. I am on it whether I want to or not. I want to connect more to people with that. I want to have like one-on-one conversations. That's why I create groups, with people, because you can't just go DMing people or whatever. But yeah, social media has changed it. And it's overstimulated us in ways that can affect our awakenings. And journaling your emotions is good. Allowing yourself to feel instead of constantly analyzing. Just feel. You don't have to analyze why you feel what you feel. And something else that matters deeply. You do not need to rush your healing. Awakening is not a race. There's no prize for collapsing your nervous system and trying to become more spiritual. Real healing often happens slowly, safely, gently, layer by layer. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is rest. It is. Rest is so underrated, but so necessary. We need more rest, just to sit with ourselves. And I'm going to close out this, but I decided what I'm going to do is after I close this out, if you want to continue listening, it's going to be about my spiritual awakenings and what I experienced. And I want to share that because some people don't know what to feel and how messy it can get. And so I'm going to close this out first. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today because this is a very important topic. It's something that I really realize is important to discuss because people just think it's a woo woo experience and it's so much more than that. If today's episode resonated with you, I want you to remember this. You don't need to have everything figured out in order to be growing. You're allowed to evolve slowly. You're allowed to question old patterns. You are allowed to outgrow what no longer feels aligned, and you are allowed to heal while still being human. A spiritual awakening is not about perfection. Please don't look for perfection because this isn't where you're going to find it. It is about becoming more connected to yourself with honesty, compassion, and awareness. And if you're in a season of awakening right now, be gentle with yourself. Your nervous system deserves support too. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next episode. So now I want to continue this for those of you who want to listen to what my spiritual awakenings were like. And I realized that a lot of people are looking for the big one, just the ultimate spiritual awakening, and that's it. They're set. They have changed, they have evolved, and they're just going to continue to grow in that direction. Well, the first time I had one, it was when I transferred from chiropractic school in LA on up to the Bay Area. Something just kept on telling me, you gotta transfer, you gotta go, you gotta go. And the universe is pushing me in that direction. And so I moved up there, and, it was just kind of different. And it was a time in the Bay Area where spirituality was still big. Now it's more techy, it's different, it's expensive, so there's different focuses now in the Bay Area. But spirituality was being forced upon me, and some of my peers at school they were claiming to be spiritual, but they were mean. And so I didn't want to be spiritual because I didn't want to be mean. I was still in my people pleasing, over giving phase. So I wasn't seeing good examples at first. And of course, it's 1999 when I transferred up there, July of 1999. I started in that quarter because it was on a quarter system and we went year round. If you miss a quarter, you were behind. So you go year round, no breaks unless you choose to take a break and be behind. So there's what? Really no computers. They started coming along, but not really there. Not the information that we have now. And, so I had to go find sources. But I have my friend Corrine, not her real name. I'm protecting her. And so I'm not saying her real name, who kind of forced my gift onto me and spirituality onto me. And I used to bug the crap out of her, but she liked it. And we became good friends, and I would ask her a lot of questions because I didn't understand why this was happening. I went from, I'm going to be a scientist, you know, being a bio major, and even at one time I was going to be doing neurobiology and psychobiology, and then I just moved into biology and had a good experience with chiropractic and became a chiropractor. Yeah, I was in chiropractic school because it felt so good. I'm like, I need this in my life, and I want to do this for other people. So while I'm there, it's like, wait a minute, why is this happening? And why are people out of nowhere coming to me for readings? What the hell is happening? I didn't even know how to give a reading or what to do, so I just had people ask me questions. And all this spirituality was being forced and making me question everything. And a lot of sadness was there because I had a lot of sadness in my life. My son was still alive, but I had a lot of trauma, especially after my mom died. Yeah, when my mom was alive, we were poor. We lived in motels. We struggled. But after she died, the abuse came. And that was very hard. And a lot of things I buried. And then I got pregnant at 13 and trying to fight to keep custody of him. And I became such a fighter and very angry with the system. And so I was processing a lot and then trying to stay in school and make sure I passed those classes because it was expensive even at the time to go to school, and I couldn't fail because I had no other future. If I wasn't in school, I was just going to end up struggling or being on welfare, and I felt humiliated by the public, being on welfare and having food stamps. So I'm going through all this and it's uncomfortable and I'm questioning everything and everybody, and plus I can read them and it's just awkward. So it wasn't clear. My first spiritual experience was not clear at all. So this is around 1999 and I was very confused, and I didn't know how to look for books or look for information. I didn't know about Hay House or any of those things yet. I was watching a little bit of Oprah here and there and trying to find stuff, but I was alone. I was alone with my thoughts a lot, and it just made me depressed. So I buried it. I buried what was happening. I did the readings because hey, it's cool. I get $20 for each reading. That was cool back then. And that really helped me take care of my son and keep the lights on and food, along with other things, and gas money. So I buried a lot of it and I just felt very ungrounded, very stuck, and I started having like adrenal problems and weight gain, and I wasn't even overeating, and but I was trying to be normal. That was the goal. I wanted to be normal. I didn't want this happening to me. But then it kept on forcing itself out. And so as time went on, I would find a little bit of information in school and it would help me to understand what was happening. And I started to like it. And then I remember telling another friend, I said, you know what? I'm in school, but I'm never going to practice as a chiropractor. And that's sad to me because I love chiropractic. I go to chiropractor every week. I keep myself mobile and pain free. I'm 55. I take care of my mobility. And I just knew that I wasn't going to practice chiropractic. But then, because I transferred, I graduated in December of 2001. So I graduate, and I'm like, now what? And I started doing like naturopathy because it allowed for the spirituality and the woo woo, and I had a lot of fun, but I would meet all sorts of spiritual people, and we were just a mess. We were ungrounded and weird acting, but I look back and it's like we all had so much pain and trauma and probably didn't find relief in therapy at the time, or, they just probably discounted traditional religion. When you go through something bad, you just don't know who to trust. And we were just struggling. It's like, I don't want to be like this. But I was in it, but I didn't want to be there. And so I had a miniature awakening happen next. It's 2004, and I got bit on the face by a family dog because we rescued troubled dogs. We just love animals. I grew up with a mom who's an animal lover. And so this dog bit me, and I'm on the table waiting in the emergency room to get stitches. Like the left corner of my face has been off. It's grown a lot in all those years of tissue and the healing. And when you have facial stuff, it makes you emotional. I don't know if you notice when you go to the dentist, you become very emotional after dental work. That can happen because, facial stuff can do that. So I'm on the table, and the surgeon comes in, and I'm just telling him all this crazy spiritual stuff. And I'm just like reading him, and he's just probably thinking, darn, she's going through some trauma or something. And he gave me some morphine, I guess, to shut me up. And, because I wasn't feeling pain, but the way that I looked, I should feel pain. So then I go home and I can't go to my office. So guess what? I start working on the platform. I start doing the readings and working on the platform, and it just takes off from day one. I mean, it just grew and grew. And there wasn't a lot of advisors back then like there is now, but there was quite a few. There were still 30 pages of advisors, and it took off. But then I had to deal with other spiritual stuff. I had to see how some spiritual advisors are bullies and how they're mean to each other, and we had this forum, and they were mean to me, or it was just really a weird time, and I wasn't liking spirituality still because I realized a lot of people were misusing it. They just wanted to be spiritual and all-knowing and better than everyone, and so there was that arrogance because it's a trauma response in their case. They felt bad. They grew up probably in a home where they were not loved or felt good. So now it's like, I'm high and mighty. I'm spiritual. I'm close to God. I don't need to heal. And there was a lot of that. And I'm just like, no. And, so I looked for therapy and I did energy work and went to spiritual healers. I did everything to just really help myself. And I really dove in deep so I can cope. And so a lot of my emotions were after that injury and being forced to do this work, I was in it, like it or not, and I almost felt like, oh my goodness, does this happen because I didn't listen when I was in chiropractic school and immediately go to doing this spiritual work? Because there was like 3 years that I was doing naturopathy and some readings, and I was doing life insurance exams for extra money because I had done that since I was 17. When people signed up for life insurance, I'd go to their homes, I did their exams because I was a medical assistant at first. When I turned 16, I was one because that was going to be my big career for me and my son, to be able to take care of him. And I was just exhausted a lot. I was trying to smile and understand it, but I was so exhausted. And so then that continued my journey. Then 2008 comes and my son passes. And the way that people responded to me, it's like, okay, non spiritual people just didn't know what to say. Or they say stuff like, I pray over my kids. I think everybody does. If you're a parent, you know how scary it is being a parent. And when they're little, you just want to keep them alive. And when they get older, you still want to keep them alive. And you worry and you panic. And, you wonder, is the world going to be good to them? And, you do. It's weird. When I was growing up, it just, growing up in the 70s, there were things that happened, but it didn't seem as overwhelming as it does now. And so when I lost my son, I had a group of people who just didn't know what to say, and they would say weird stuff because of their own fear. And then you have the spiritual people saying, well, you're spiritual. It shouldn't bother you. I said, you really think I shouldn't feel anything for a child that I brought into the world and I loved and motivated me to become me? And that was pretty scary. And so I was having this awakening of seeing what that bypassing was still there, that people were moving to spirituality, trying not to feel, trying to be unbothered, trying to avoid their pain. And they didn't like that I decided to live my pain out raw. But it was interesting because some didn't like it. But at the same time, my business tripled because other people said, you know, I know that you understand pain on a deep level because I'm witnessing it. Even no matter what you went through before, I see this. And I just feel like you're more relatable and you're going to be patient and non judgmental and understanding. So my business grew, which made some people in the spiritual community who worked on the platform not like me and wanted me to quit and take a break and stuff. And I said, no, I'm not supposed to. I'm supposed to push through. And so I just wore my healing out in public and talked about it on radio shows. And, back then it was not podcasts, it was more like you do blog talk radio and, stuff like that. And I even had a show called The Mixed Talk for a while, on The Mixed Talk for a while. And I just talked about everything, just being vulnerable and transparent and some people struggle with that because a lot of people are hoping that if they're spiritual, they won't feel bad anymore. They just feel enlightened and they will understand the world and the world will make sense. And I said, no, it's making peace with what is. That's how I see a spiritual awakening is, change what you need to change and make peace with what is or what has happened and move forward accordingly and decide what type of life you want to co-create from here. So, I didn't have like when my son passed with that awakening, it wasn't like I could really sit and grieve. I spent more time questioning people and isolating and being angry. And, people had to watch their words because they were going to get told off. They're going to get cussed the fuck out. And I was that angry because I thought people really think I shouldn't feel anything. And I realized how much projection was coming my way. And so it made me isolate. I didn't party the same. I didn't date. I used to go to every social thing. I became big time extrovert. And I just went to less and less stuff for a while. I didn't want to be around people. I was like, I don't think I like people. So I went through that, and I went through questioning what's the point of life, and even wondering if I wanted to live. So I'd be honest, I didn't know if I wanted to live anymore because the world just sucked without my son, and it sucked how the world was showing me and revealing itself after my son passed. And I said, I don't want to be around people who don't want to feel and don't want to feel their emotions and be genuine and authentic, and they just want to bury, you know. But I didn't want that, and that's what I was seeing. And even some people cut me off all of a sudden because now we've got Facebook, and I'm venting on Facebook sometimes, and I didn't get invited to some of the parties, and that became fine. And then I just kind of had different friends and different connections, and I needed my spiritual coach, and I went to my best technique, for support, and got those healings, and that really made a difference. And I like that the person who was my best practitioner, she's since passed, but she was diagnosed with cancer, and she's very open, and it's all over her website, everything. And that was her spiritual experience, and she would always say, "Thank you, cancer," because of how it opened up her world. And so she was diagnosed at the same time that my son got his brain tumor and died. And, you know, just being around her and her showing so much compassion and empathy towards me made me go to my best treatments all the time, and that really helped because it was like, here's a window of someone who's going through something tough and getting it. And so the way that people flocked to me when my son died, I flocked to her because she had cancer, and it was like stage 3 non-Hodgkin's, the deadly one. And, she eventually went into remission for 15 years, and then, she passed, and that was just sad because she was only like 45 when she passed, and such a beautiful soul. But she helped me to survive. And at one point, though, I did say I got to get out of LA, and I moved to Austin. And, I really started to isolate. I tried to be social, but I really started to isolate. And then something said, you know what, you got to go back to California. But I went up to the Bay Area, and, so that was like, you know, it was okay being in the Bay Area. It wasn't the same like when I was in school. And school is so cool, and I wanted to explore, but by now the tech explosion took over, and the energy was different. And eventually I moved to Sacramento. So that was that awakening. It continued from like 2008 to like 2011. Just a lot was happening. That was a long one because of my son, losing my son. And, you know, I eventually wrote a book about it, and it was a mess writing that book, and I had to have it edited so many times because I couldn't get my thoughts together. And, it was tough. But then I continued on with life. And I didn't like how it was going in the Bay Area, and I didn't like some of the energies that I was coming across. And I was just trying to be understanding towards people. I said, I'm not going to judge people. I'm going to be understanding and compassionate and empathetic. And it got me around a lot of the wrong energies: competitive people, narcissistic people, just not the best people. A lot of them I met through meetups, and yeah, I stay friends with quite a few people that I've met throughout the years in these social groups that are part of meetup.com. But um, I just said I stayed too long. I stayed, what, 11, 12 years in the Bay Area the second time around. And I said, where am I going to go? And I didn't know what was happening, but I was being pushed out of the Bay Area. My guys cut off a lot of friendships and let me just see what was going on here. And, it was just weird. They really shut it all down to where if I stayed, I would have been in hell. And it was weird. I was starting to feel lonely and I didn't know what that felt like. And at first, I liked being alone because, of course, we had the pandemic in there and, it gave me time to really study. And so, I stopped all the socializing. Of course, pandemic happens. So we're in the pandemic 2020 to 2022, somewhere around there, right? And so I started spending more time alone, and my neighbors were just worried about me because I knew a lot of these people for years. I had lived in that complex, since 2012, and they're just like, "What's going on with you?" And I just said, "I just need to be alone." And something was brewing, and then I said, "I gotta move. I know I gotta move. I love this complex. I love the creek, the quarries, but it's time to move." And I was trying to figure out where to go. And I ruled out some places and I said, I got to go to Sacramento because Sacramento to me was a new Bay Area. A lot of spiritual stuff was going on up here in Sacramento, and Sacramento kind of had that Bay Area vibe because a lot of people from the Bay Area moved up to Sacramento because it was cheaper. And so a lot of that energy came up here. And when I came up here, I said, I'm going to be social. I'm going to, hire a team. I'm just going to go big. I'm going to do all these things. And I get here, and all I could do is sleep. And so that was another spiritual awakening. That was a big one. And so all I could do is sleep. And people, like the builder, they're like, "How are you doing?" Because, they're still selling homes in this community. I said, all I could do is sleep and walk the dog. I wasn't even working that much at the time. And then I snapped out of that part and started working, but I really started getting into my work, and I just thought, how did I ever socialize? I am enjoying being alone. And, I would date some, and it was weird because I would get asked out up here, and I don't know what energy I was giving out because in Bay Area nobody really asked me out. But up here I would get asked out often, and but something would just cut the dates off or stop them from happening. It was just really strange, and I did date some, but a lot of times it was just cut off, and I would have some dating relationships, but nothing really stuck. And I said, wow, I'm being forced to be alone. And I just started to like it. And I had 3 days a week where I went out and did things, or I go to a play, or I travel with family a few times. And I traveled a few times on my own, but I was really alone up here. And I didn't want to really talk to anybody. And you can't really explain it to people. They just see it as, oh, you don't want to talk to us anymore now that you moved. And it's like, I need to be alone right now. And it feels really good. I'm not bored. I'm not lonely. I'm not sad. And, I even still chat with the ex sometimes. And, and I feel fulfilled enough. I don't feel like I have to do stuff every day. And so I've been in a big spiritual awakening since January 24, 2023, when my house closed and I moved up here. And I'm just now coming out of it where it's like, okay, I've become more social again. I will go do drives and have fun and in a different way, in a more consistent basis. But I have been happy in the house. I have worked on my work. I've really got into the people pleasing over giving, and talking about spiritual stuff and boundaries and everything. And I've spent this time reflecting on my life and how I've lived it and what it means to me, and what is my legacy, because now whatever I do, it's for me and my son since he's no longer here. And I know I'm still around for quite some time. I'm 55. I still know I've got plenty of years left. And a lot of it is really trying to be there in a capacity for other people to have an easier time, because a lot of crazy thoughts happen when you're going through a spiritual awakening. It's like, what's real and what's not. And this awakening has been more like, I just need to be away from people. I just need to focus on different things and really clear up, whatever was left from trauma and childhood. And I just am doing a cleanup of whatever I think I've missed. That's what this one is about. And showing people how to deal with this stuff. I got into somatic healing even deeper, blending it with the psychic gift and intuition and energy work and, really just deep into it, deep into grief work, showing people there is life after loss. Um, so a lot of my spiritual awakenings is to make me do more of my inner work, but also how I'm going to serve others. And that can happen to you also, no matter what capacity you're in. You could be an accountant, you could be, in a room doing research, but you are still doing spiritual work. I think the person at Starbucks is doing spiritual work when they smile, and that may be the only smile the person gets for the day, and that good coffee or tea or whatever, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you're contributing spiritually if you choose to. But spiritual awakenings isn't, enlightenment, I get it, everything's great. They're not like that. A lot of times you're going inward, you're isolating. I mean, this is my longest isolation because other ones I was still socializing some, or trying to go to events and getting out of the house. But I'm not joined any meetups. I have a lot of friends that live up here. I haven't like hung out really. Where I live, we have a community center, like it's got a gym, and every month there's events and holiday events, and I participate in Halloween, and I try to give out the most candy, in the full size bars and the most stuff. I want to be the popular house. I do that. When Santa Claus comes to our area, because Santa Claus comes here, I do that, but I don't do all the social events because I don't feel a need to. I don't even turn on the TV as much. I watch documentaries here and there, and I even stopped watching 90 Day Fiancé like I was watching it during the pandemic. I just kind of have sat back, and sometimes I look and I go, how did I have time to go anywhere or do anything? Because look at what I'm creating now. So this awakening has been about creativity and blossoming into the work more. And so I've had, awakenings where it was me taking care of me and focusing on me. And this, I was focusing on me. It wasn't as painful, but some things were shocking, because there are a few friendships that disappointed me. I had a friend who, because I've always been like 20 pounds overweight, but I like where the weight is. And sometimes I've been chubbier because of hormone stuff. And I had a friend that came out that she thought that she was better than me because she is thinner than me. And she's like, at least I'm thinner than you. You may have accomplished X, Y, and Z, but at least I'm thinner. And you just look at people and you're like, who are they? So I've done a lot of looking at people in my life, like, who are they? What are their intentions? A bigger issue with two family members came out. So I just kind of look at people differently, like, who are you? What are you about? And I have this different view of how I address people in relationships, and I don't need a lot of close relationships. I believe that 3 to 5 is plenty. I don't need girls' trips anymore. I used to do some of that. I don't need a lot of things that I used to think I should do, so I'd be the extrovert. And now I'm more of an introvert. I can be extroverted when I want to, but I really sit in my energy. And I notice that sometimes when I'm out in public and I do some of the regular things, like when I go to the chiropractor, she goes, "You always seem so calm." And it's like, because I'm doing all this somatic work and stuff. So I come across differently to people for sure now. Like, they just feel like I'm more at peace. And I am. I don't have like crazy, frustrating thoughts like I used to have. I'm not really disappointing people. It's like they're doing their thing, I'm doing mine. So, spiritual awakenings isn't just about enlightenment and the clouds part and, you know, the light of God comes and gives you all the answers to life. It's not like that. It gets you questioning everything, who you are and who you want to be. And I realize that's what I want to help people with. So I help people with 3 things: grief, um, how to become a more regulated psychic if you're doing that, but also just people who want to have support on their spiritual awakening. So those are the things that I focus on. But I've rambled quite a bit. Always feel free to ask questions, or if you want me to go into more detail on my awakenings, these are just like the light parts, trying to give you somewhat of an understanding. Feel free. Definitely feel free to email me. You can message me through this podcast. If you see me on social media, and say, will you go into more detail? And I gladly will, because it's something that I want to share more. So I want to thank you for listening to this long-winded part of the podcast. And have a great day, and I will see you in the next episode.